So this is a recording for the reading number 2 of case bundle number 3 called IT Audit that Boosts Innovation. So in short, this particular article talks about how exactly you can improve the way that you're handling IT and information technologies in your organization in order to improve innovative mindsets and in order to innovate or allow your employees to innovate. So innovators tend to think that IT systems are far too orderly and standardized and they're controlling, and they cannot facilitate innovation, because innovation is a messy process. Creativity is a very messy process. There's a lot of failures, lots of reiterations, and false beginnings, and it takes a long while for them to start. But as anyone who's read these articles or read about these organizations will realize that lots of managers understand this concept, and they actually are still able to improve innovation by leveraging those ITs in a certain way. So how can organizations do that? Now there are some summarized findings that are written on the main page, which is IT departments should support innovators' activities by developing capabilities critical to the innovation process. So the first thing they need to do is to create the kind of required capabilities in their employees. Number 2, IT can provide the software tools that would streamline and facilitate the innovation process in all of its stages. And number 3, routines and policies are needed that give innovators adequate control over the IT resources they require. So if you create the right policies, if you create the right standards of operating procedures, you can actually give innovators more control over those resources whenever they need them, because sometimes they're shared. So I won't talk about these exact examples that are present throughout the article, but I will talk about the basic ideas. You can read the examples and then connect them. So one of the statements in between here is, how can IT help you? Tends to become some variation of keep it away. Why? And that is the problem. That is exactly the problem. So if you don't understand that IT can actually help you, you're doing something wrong. So let's see how that actually works out. So this research that this article did was about how innovation can be facilitated. So the research says that companies require 3 things in order to use IT for facilitating innovation activities. First, they need specific IT-enabled organizational capabilities, which are formed by combining their IT assets with non-IT assets. Meaning, capabilities are all about how something is used, right? It's a skill. So in order to do that, you will need to take the assets, which could be data, infrastructure, expertise, all of that, and connect it with the concepts of innovation, which is creativity, innovation, technological sophistication of the management team, and the lab resources. If you connect these two, you create capabilities. Okay. Second, companies need a strong set of IT-based tools to effectively sustain these central activities for innovation. So you need tools as well, right? And you also need control over the innovation and the access to these technologies. So capabilities, tools, and controls are these 3 legs of the stool that we refer to as the innovation stool, right? So let's look at them. Capabilities. According to this article, there are 6 organizational capabilities that any organization must have if they want to work on their innovation and the innovative performance. Number 1, portfolio and project management. Number 2, collaboration. Number 3, knowledge and information management. Number 4, business IT linkages. Number 5, ambidexterity. And number 6, competitive intelligence. Now, what is each one of them? Let's look at that. There's also a diagram given at the end that actually talks about or divides these technology tools into different classes. I'll refer back to it, but when you're listening to this, I would suggest that you open up that table so as to connect the ideas that I'm about to present. Okay? So, number 1, portfolio and project management. So this capability is required to learn to organize the organization and its portfolio of all the innovation activities that you do. If you are unable to manage it, if you're unable to handle it, you won't know when to stop a project. You won't know when a project doesn't have the right funds. You won't know when a project has too many funds. You won't know how much longer it will take or whether it will be useful even. The company also won't be able to aim toward optimizing their portfolio or different projects that you need to put into this system. So on the one hand, having too few innovations at the same time means that you will lose out on opportunities, but at the same time, having too many innovative ideas would mean that you are ignoring your basic operations and that you might be in a risk of running out of resources. So therefore, this capability draws on portfolio management, which is managing multiple things at the same time and multiple innovation projects at the same time. So many companies that they actually surveyed talked about the same concept. And these project management methodologies are important for it. Number 2 is collaboration. This capability of course allows innovators who have the right resources and knowledge to work with other people, either synchronously, which means at the same time, or asynchronously, where they make some stuff and some other team member creates another part of it, or who may not even be physically there, maybe in some different time zone or physically be somewhere else, but they share information and ideas. This can be done through blogs, this can be done through various collaboration software, this can be done through various synchronization tools and wikis, social networking, several tools. To give you an example, whenever we are actually, when we refer to how the academia handled the current COVID crisis, teaching was done in 2 ways, synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is when you're taking live real-time classes using Microsoft Teams or Google Meet or Zoom or any such software, where students and teachers are present at the same time and are listening to each other or are discussing. Asynchronous is what this audio recording will be for you. You'll be listening to it afterwards. There is no live session going on. So that's an asynchronous way of sharing ideas. So similarly, organizations need to understand the same concept, and there's an example given for it from various companies, specifically Boeing as well. Number 3, knowledge and information management. The innovation process, by its very nature, it's all about creation and usage of knowledge. Innovators start with an idea, they have their own ideas about it, they have their own knowledge base for it, but they need to transform it into a product. And for that, they need the knowledge of other people, and they need to integrate it with other people's knowledge. So everybody knows the more innovations that you come up with, the more valuable your organization becomes. And for that, you need to understand that people need access to knowledge. They need access to the right kind of knowledge and be able to share it too. So this capability of knowledge and knowledge sharing can be enhanced by things like expert systems, by knowledge management system, by data mining software, by online analytical processing software, by database systems, by analytics, by decision support systems, by artificial intelligence systems, and all of those kind of systems. Number 4, business IT linkages. The objective of this capabilities is to make IT departments more becoming partners with innovation centers, so that there is more fostering of productive interaction between them. So it is important that innovators have basic knowledge of IT and IT professionals understand innovation. You cannot expect both parties to be rivals to each other. They have to work with each other. The people who are bringing in the technological resources and the people who are coming up with ideas need to work with each other. They need to work together with each other. And there's a huge challenge that needs to be overcome. The IT specialists are always hoping for standardization. They want things to be easier, simpler, so that they're easier to maintain. On the other hand, the business individuals, the innovators, want things to be, crazy. They don't want standardization. They want freedom. They want more creativity. They don't want things to be easy to, put into little boxes. Now, you need to bring them both together. So one way to develop this capability is to hold conferences and meetings between both sides so that they can share their expertise. Another way is to require IT specialists is to sit during research and development meetings so that they understand what the innovation process is all about. They understand what team building for these ideas is all about. IT specialists are responsible for innovation success metrics, for instance collaboration and effectiveness of those knowledge, so they need to be brought on board. Another related concept is ambidexterity. The word ambidextrous or ambidexterity actually means someone who can use both hands at the same time. Most of us are either right-handed or left-handed, but there are people who have the ability to use both hands equally. These people are referred to as ambidextrous. So the same idea falls for organization as well. Ambidexterity is the capability of IT staff to achieve excellence in operations while also understanding the business vision and balancing it with that. If the IT function lacks operational excellence, the quality of its support will be inferior. So in other words, the IT needs to know to do their own job. If their networks, their servers, their databases, intranets, portals and components that form their infrastructural support and backbone are not working, then they will be useless. So they need to be adequate in their functionality. Collaboration technologies such as wikis will not be available if they don't do their functional part properly. However, if the IT function doesn't have any strategic vision, so if the IT part, if the functional part is done properly, only then will the network IT be available for people, right? So that people can collaborate, which we talked about earlier and in the previous reading. But on the other hand, if the IT function doesn't understand the larger strategic vision, then they will only be doing it in a tunnel way. They'll only be focusing on their function without realizing that these IT functions are necessary for the larger strategic vision to be achieved. So that's also important. So IT could be unwilling to explore new ideas, and that's what they need to change. They gave an example of one company that they studied which demonstrated strategic vision by granting resources to IT for innovative activities based on the need to stay cutting edge rather than on detailed ROI, cost and standardized criteria. This means that that company was allowing its IT department to try out new technologies, right, so that they could improve the way that they were doing things instead of focusing or refusing to give them new technologies because they were too expensive. They allowed them experimentation. So that's important. Number 6, competitive intelligence. This capability facilitates learning what competitors are doing. So it's all about understand failing to do, and if you fail to do this, you won't understand what the opportunities are. You need to understand what your rivals are doing. So for that you need to gather data, right? So recently companies have realized that when they actually circulate information about themselves, their rivals are also doing the same. Reading them and following them up can help you understand what they're doing. And it's very important to actually keep on gaining competitive intelligence, learning about their activities, learning about their strategies, learning about the products and services that they're launching, analyzing the market trends that are shifting according to their rivals products as well is equally important. So for any kind of online competitive intelligence to be user friendly and productive, you need to have a stronger relationship between your IT staff and your innovative staff. Number 2, the tools. So these are some of the capabilities that we talked about. Now we're talking about the tools, if you recall earlier. Tools. Innovators who routinely make effective use of IT also need to use lots of tools. So, and those tools need to be technically be made for those specific needs. So by contrast, tools that have long learning curves relative to frequency or length of tool usage are less likely to stick. So if you have a tool that is used very rarely and it's hard to use, then it won't be used for long. But if you compare that to tools that are used more commonly and that are easier to use and show both things, which is ease of use as well as actual usability, or rather the advantage that you get out of it. So ease of use is very important, as well as the usefulness of that tool. So one way to increase the stickiness or usability of tools is to let the research and development department choose its own based on the tool's perceived value. So don't force tools on them, right? The innovators should be able to choose the tools that they need. Don't force the tools that the IT people are telling you to use. Conversely, one of the studies also said that IT should not dictate tools. Why? Because the IT almost always will try to choose tools based on their needs of standardization. They will choose tools that they think are useful enough, but they may not be useful. So let the people who are using those tools choose them. The IT can guide them, but don't let them choose them, right? It is wishful thinking that IT specialists can use their expertise in software to purchase a toolbox containing relevant and appropriate set of innovative tools. On the other hand, to address concerns about intellectual property, corporate leaders responsible for the procurement, development and maintenance of tools, which are innovation managers or corporate IT, need to offer guidance to innovators. So they need to also guide them to choose the right tools, the higher management, the upper management. So for each type of tool, products from many vendors exist and you can choose them. So there's a whole table that we'll cover that I was talking about earlier. We refer to as IT tools to support and manage innovation, where we'll discuss these tools. Number 3, control. One of the most important roadblocks to innovation is when R&D staff lack adequate control of computing resources and tools that they require. Because of rigid standardization, they may not have access to the technologies. So an absence of innovation facilitating IT governance practices is at the root of the problem. So in many cases, they don't have access to the right tools. So we observe that many different models of control exist. Some organizations put significant IT resources directly in the hands of the R&D people, the innovators, while others will actually say that you have to access the IT department to get access to those technologies. The specific mode of control is not as important as making sure that there is a process to do that. So if innovators need access to some technologies, they should know where to go to and whom to refer to. IT departments have good reason for wanting to control hardware and software. This is because they need to standardize and to protect the system as well. But sometimes innovators only want to get non-standard one-off tools for one small task, and then they won't use them again, right? So they need to also be discouraged for that. Letting standardization be the driving IT philosophy is not the right way. So asking innovators to create a business plan to say why they need their technologies is how it should be done. That's very important. So that they can justify why they need that technology. Don't just get it because because the innovators are asking for it. Get it because if they can justify that tool makes sense. So it's hard to do, but it needs to be done. So in such cases, research and development departments can be well served if they are allowed to control their own IT tools. So let them use them, and once they've justified that those tools need to be bought. Another approach is for R&D and corporate IT to work out variance policies for permitting deviations from standardization. So you can also talk to them, each other, and say why, when the IT will control the technology, or when innovators will control that technology, whatever you're buying, whatever new hardware, software buying, you can have policies in place for it. Now let's look at some tools. Now this is similar to the set of tools that we talked about in earlier reading. So the first class of tools that I talk about is idea generation, which falls in the category of two different categories: brainstorming and mind mapping, and market research and competitive intelligence. So in order for brainstorming and mind mapping, you could use several tools that are available in the market. I would recommend that you Google each one of these tools to see what they look like, so as to understand what they're useful for. So MindJet, Mind Manager, these are used for mind mapping, which is a technique, right? Bright Idea, WebStorm for mindstorming, brainstorming, Concept Draws, Mind Map, all of these are for mind mapping tools. The second category, which is market research, competitive intelligence, or strategic problem solving, you can use different tools that can help you put up different ideas, and it helps you analyze them based on already present data that you also input into those systems. Competitive intelligence data, or the data of the market. Then it helps you suggest what kind of decisions you should take. So there are several names given here. You should Google these. You might find more information about these tools. Then there is analysis, and within analysis there are 4 or 5 different categories. Let's look at each one of them. The first one is simulation modeling. So you can do simulation modeling of whatever you are trying to create. Excel is one of the simplest yet most powerful and most easily usable tools for this purpose. So you can model different ideas, whether it be chemical reactions, or whether it be some business models, some portfolio models, or investment models, whatever you're making up, or some prediction models, some forecast models. Another tool is Pro Model. The third one that they say is industry specific. So you may have different tools for different industries as well. The second category is statistical. So in order to assess or evaluate the relationships between different pieces of data that you have, or different experiments that you've run, or data that you've collected through surveys, there are several tools: SPSS, SAS, R, Jamovi, JASP, Lizrel, eViews. There are several research tools available that allow statistical analysis to understand causal relationships and even correlation relationships. The third one is process management. There are several tools that let you design different processes and evaluate their effectiveness and efficiency. They are very useful for business process reengineering. Lombardi, Metastorm, and BPM are some examples. So they let you simulate different business models or different steps with which you are doing things. Fourth is visualization and design. So there are tools that let you design whatever you are building. Okay, the structure for it, or the blueprint, so to speak. There are certain tools: Autodesk's AutoCAD, right? Google SketchUp, molecular visualization. Another tool that's very useful for this is Microsoft Visio, that lets you create these designs as well. Number 5 is rapid prototyping. Prototyping actually comes from the Latin word proto, which means first. Prototyping is a process where you actually create multiple iterations of a product. You keep on creating new versions of the same product, improve it, show it to the people that are supposed to evaluate it, they review it, they give you suggestions, and you make another improvement. And this is an iterative process, also referred to as rapid prototyping. So rapid prototyping is a process that will require tools that will help you come up with new mock-ups or new ideas. 2 pieces of tools that can be used for it is Autodesk Inventor and Object. I would recommend again Googling these to search for what they look like. You don't necessarily need to have these tools to do this, but they will definitely help a lot. Then there are collaboration tools. Social networking is the first category, which allows you to connect with different innovators, marketeers, and people who are within your organization or experts outside your organization. So IBM Lotus Connections is a very famous collaborative tool, that is a collaborative tool suite that is used in various organizations. Microsoft has its own version, which is called Microsoft Teams. Google has its own called Google Meet. Another one that started this whole phenomena of collaborative softwares within organizations, Slack, is another famous one. And there are several others. You could also use social networks: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, ResearchGate, several others. There are several dedicated websites for these purposes. Number 2 is document management and portal. Again, as I said, Microsoft Teams, it already allows connection to another piece of Microsoft's tool called SharePoint. These days Microsoft Teams has integrated Microsoft SharePoint support, which allows you to share documents. In fact, if you were to refer to the example of when you were taking your first COVID classes, files uploaded to Microsoft Teams were accessible to students through Microsoft SharePoint. They can be shared between different teams as well, quite easily. So Microsoft SharePoint is a tool that allows document sharing quite easily. IBM has a similar software called WebSphere. Other softwares include OpenText, LiveLink, Atlassian, Confluence. Google Meet also has similar tools which actually uses Google Drive to share documents. Then there's communication. So video conferencing and messaging, it doesn't mention Microsoft Teams, but it has replaced Skype for business. Video link, Microsoft Messenger used to be used for this purpose, which is now rolled up into Microsoft Teams itself. AIM, which is America Online Instant Messenger, Twitter, Microsoft Messenger, Yahoo Messenger, all of these tools used to do the same thing. Google Meet does the same thing. Another new recent tool by Google is Google Chat that does the same thing. Their older tool called Google Hangout is now used only by businesses, also does the same thing. Then there is another category called innovation management, which includes portfolio management, project management, product lifecycle management, and intellectual property management. Several tools are used for that. For portfolio and project management, Microsoft Project, open source project.net, Primavera, PERT, CPM, Oracle's Primavera. These are all project management tools. I am assuming that you have studied these or will study these in your project management courses. They are essential as project management tools. Then we have other project lifecycle management tools. For instance, one's created by Siemens, another one created by Oracle called Agile, and SAP PLM, which is product lifecycle management tool, which actually helps you collaborate and forecast and understand the creation of a project or a product and its entire lifecycle until it is disposed of. Another set of tools relates to IP management, which is intellectual property management. So the laws dealing with it, patent searching and patent management, what patents we have, what our rivals have, whom we need to buy some patents from when you're trying to create a new product, all of those can be done through these tools called RSG Media, Rights Logic, and Aqua. There are lots of online services available that do the same as well. Then there's a portion about lessons for research and development managers and innovation leaders. What should they need to do in order to improve the way that they're doing things? Again, it talks about different examples. So building an organization's capabilities for innovations implies not only acquisition of those technologies, but also understanding that the IT department has a role to play. And it can contribute significantly to identifying technologies appropriate for that organization. One of the most primary lessons for innovators is that IT can and should be an active partner in innovation and should not be an enemy. However, that often doesn't happen and that causes problems. You need to also understand that establishing a working relationship between R&D, which is the innovators, and the IT is not always easy, because the researchers typically have very little time to creating and nurturing this relationship. So one solution is to call in the IT people for meetings, as I mentioned earlier, and let them work with each other. This serendipitous, which means something which happens out of coincidence or luck or good luck, can result actually reflects a large and chronic problem, which is insufficient appreciation by R&D professional of what IT may have to offer. So one of the reasons that this doesn't happen is because the R&D people think the IT people won't really be helping them. Why? Because innovators often fail to use the tools that are already available. What happens is sometimes innovators want another new tool, when in reality there's a tool already available by the IT people, and then they think that tool is not good enough and they don't adopt it. Number two, they find those tools difficult to use. And number three, they fear that the threat of intellectual property will leak out, that their ideas will be shared with other rivals. So it's the innovative managers that need to handle these. So in order to facilitate the adoption of these tools that was not invented there in that company and actually are coming in from elsewhere, research leaders need to set an example. They need to use those tools themselves so that their own employees use them as well. So they said that it was seen as another form of tax if we force people to use it, and the only way to do it is to use those tools themselves. So oftentimes your organization already has the tools that you need. So once people actually start using them, they realize that these are good tools, right? So sometimes that solves the problem. R&D leaders can address the difficulty of tool usage by working with IT to make it simpler, to make better user interfaces, They could give better trainings. They can be technology facilitators so that people are going to use those tools. The heightened usage of tools, however, can increase the visibility and availability of innovation related information, which is very sensitive. So the R&D staff might perceive these tools as a breach of data security. So it's the IT people that need to, help them out and make them realize that these intellectual properties will be made secure. And lastly, R&D managers need to educate the IT department about these technologies that they're using and the innovation process itself. So the IT people understand the usage or the purpose of this innovation thing. Now there are some lessons for IT managers themselves. The first is that the IT manager must understand that they actually need to be playing 4 different roles: benchmarker, integrator, educator, and enabler. As the benchmarker, the IT department can go through different tools and identify which are the best ones and tell them why we need to approach a certain target, which is the benchmark. So the IT department needs to inform users about the best practices in the industry as the benchmarker, educate them so that those are what they're looking for. As an integrator, they must keep on integrating knowledge and opportunities into the system instead of letting them become silos. In other words, they need to integrate it throughout the organization. Okay. Then thirdly, they need to be educators, right? They need to constantly, the IT department constantly needs to teach their R&D people. So they need to focus on Six Sigma in the house of quality, which is to maintain and to constantly work towards quality management and towards quality itself, right? Because they will need to improve the way that they're doing things. Then they need to also be enablers. Oh, and by the way, the direct involvement of IT specialists in project teams ensures the awareness of innovators and their needs. So IT specialists can therefore work on pull rather than push modes and participate in project decisions. Right? They need to be part of it. So they need to pull, which means they need to go and ask the R&D people what they need instead of throwing tools at them. And lastly, as enabler, the IT department should provide and support tools required by the innovators, and it should be directly involved in developing new tools as the need is required. So they need to work with the innovators, which is a more of a bottom-up approach, and they should be helping them out coming up with new technologies. Then there are some lessons for CEOs. CEOs need to actively participate in the innovative initiatives. They need to recognize and reward any kind of collaborative innovative work whenever somebody comes up with it or groups of people come up with it. They need to play the role of creating a linkage between the business innovators, the R&D people, and the IT people. They need to enhance this capability by ensuring that the IT leadership has a say in major decisions, that they are not just a support function but are a core function. They need to encourage ambidexterity in the IT department, where they must understand operational level things as well as strategic things. That's called ambidexterity, we discussed earlier. And they must ensure that innovators have adequate control over the computing resources that they need, that the IT department does not become a gatekeeper but rather a gate facilitator. Recognize that innovation is not simply a matter of R&D, but is a very complex process that is socially complex and requires several departments to work with each other. So it's only when all 3-4 parties, which is the R&D managers, the innovation leaders, the IT managers, and the senior leadership, when they come on board and realize the importance of innovation and work together, can we achieve this. That's the end of this reading.